Here.
Here, will you hold up a copy of your book? Oh, thank you. Everyone, perhaps she needs no introduction. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out on a wet Sunday afternoon. We all appreciate it. I'd like to thank the Linfield College Nicholson Library for hosting this event today. And also, this event is co-sponsored with 3rd Street Books, the McMinnville Public Library, and the Linfield College's Nicholson Library. Check all of our websites for future literary events in McMinnville. With her new book, and here I would hold it if I could. Thank you. Do you have kids? Life When the Answer is No. Author Kate Kaufmann fills that potentially awkward space after that question is asked with stories, conversations, and personal narrative. A 15-year resident of Carleton, Kate invited today another former Carletonian and a current McMinnvillian who are featured in the book to join her in conversation about life without having children of their own. When my book group discussed Kate's book, 8 moms and 2 non-moms talked nonstop for 2.5 hours. And that's never happened before. So a lot of lively conversation. Please join me in welcoming author Kate Kaufmann.
I just need to stand and take this in for a moment. Thank you so much for coming and to be introduced as author Kate Kaufmann. Wow. Thank you. There's something that's just so perfectly completing about coming to this place in this county on this day. Because really, this is where my personal path started, and I wanted to just mention a little bit about that. But before I do, we're going to be talking about life not having children. And that topic can be a sensitive topic. It can be a charged topic. And so what I want to talk about first is cake, okay? So picture that I have a big bowl of cake batter. And in the cake batter, we're going to put about 80 to 85% of that cake batter into layer cake pans. And that represents about the proportion of women and probably 2 men who will go on to have children. The other 15 to 20% are the ones who don't. And we're going to take that batter and we're going to divide it in half. 1/2 is going to go into a cupcake pan that represents women who wanted to be in the layer cake, but they don't get to be in the layer cake. And those are the women who wanted to have kids and for a whole score of reasons didn't end up having them. And then the other cupcake, again about equal size, is for those women who are fine being cupcakes. And that's who they are. And so that makes up the universe of people who don't have children. And I offer that as a way to kind of come back and ground, because again, this can be a sensitive and charged topic. And you might see some of us wearing these little stickers with cupcakes on them. And so if you don't have kids, and if you feel comfortable doing so, since we talk so rarely about this, feel free to take a cupcake sticker and loud and proud cupcakes. So let's see, I think I should stand for this part and then I'll sit down later on. I wanted to read to you part of the introduction of the book to give you an idea of what it is and how it works. A new friend and I walk along a near-deserted beach, kicking sand, talking as women do when getting better acquainted. I inhale, then pose the question I always dread hearing and never ask, simply to get it over with. Do you have kids? No, I don't, she answers. You? No. We stroll in silence for a while, drifting through the expanse of sand that engulfs us. I've wanted to talk about life without kids for a long time, so I ask if she's okay discussing the subject. She is. We talk about how we define our lives, what matters to us, how we are different than our sisters and friends with children of their own. It is fascinating. Neither of us has ever talked like this before. As the years pass, our friendship grows and we keep talking. Sometimes we include another childless friend or two in the conversation. And nowadays, every once in a while, we host small gatherings of women who likewise don't have kids. And I'm itching to do one with men too, so we'll see if we can pull that off. We talk about our lives and how our lives are impacted in many ways by the absence of offspring, including health, spirituality, and how we define family. Money, end-of-life planning, how we spend our holidays. Like us, these women rarely talk about these topics with other people, even with women they know who also don't have children. Some of us failed to conceive. Others opted out or chose not to risk passing on genetic conditions. Bottom line, no one has sprung from our loins. That's not bad or good, just different. There are things we non-moms know a lot about, like There are things we non-moms know little about, like labor pains, imposing teen curfews, what it feels like when a daughter becomes a mother herself. There are other things we often know quite a lot about, continuous learning or personal independence, or donating to a college fund for a child we may never meet. Such things are not off limits to mothers, of course. We simply have more capacity in our lives to pursue them. Why does this matter? For one, because women without kids are everywhere. A sister, an aunt, a child's favorite teacher. Depending on when they were born, 1 of every 5 or 6 women over age 45 will never have children. That's double the ratio just 1 generation ago. Today's younger daughters and granddaughters may well grow up to join us. Childlessness could double again as Gen X and millennial women consider their partnering options, the economics of raising a family, and the impact of population growth on our planet. As today's young women contemplate motherhood, who do they turn to with their questions if they're considering a path that doesn't include making babies, or learn they might not have them because of infertility or lack of a viable partner? I wish I'd had older non-moms to confide in and seek guidance from. But after my former husband and I moved away from the city in which we met, first to the suburbs, then to a small rural community, I rarely met other childless women. When I did, I was unsure how to broach the subject without feeling like I was prying. If I spoke up and mothers were in the group, they'd quickly console me or point out all the kids I have in my life, nieces and nephews and my friends' kids, or talk about pets. That was nice, but the women I wanted to hear from, the ones like me, mostly kept mum. And so today what I thought we would do is I've invited 2 women who are profiled in the book to join me in a conversation about this awkward, sometimes sensitive topic as a way to give some insights into how these conversations can perpetuate. Because my goal is to move the needle of stigmas and stereotypes more towards the middle than have it be as if we're very much polarized. So on my left is BOBBI Hartwell. She and her husband formerly owned the gas station deli in what? Filling station? Oh yeah, that makes sense. It was a shop. It was a food shop. Yeah. Thanks. I never got that till just right now. Word person. Yeah. Filling station deli in Carlton. And on my right is Jenny BERG, the library director of McMinnville Public Library. And both of them appear in different chapters in the book. So my first question to both of you, and I will sit now, thank you, is why did you say yes to being in the book? And how has your life been impacted as a result of doing that?
Well, Kate, when you asked me to be when you asked me to be interviewed, I don't remember that I was aware that there would be a published book. I remember.
She signed a release, it's okay.
I did sign a release. No, I remember it being your master's thesis for your fine arts masters. And you introduced the idea to me as an opportunity to share my story as part of your research for other people. You used to, all right, I have to put this paper. You use the saying a lot, nobody can tell you what it's, your mom can't tell you what it's like to not have kids, right? And so you explained it as an opportunity to share with other women who might be either thinking about it, debating, or just in that situation already. That was appealing, but selfishly, I remember saying to you that I was really excited to read the end result because I thought it would be pretty earth-shattering to hear about others' experiences because, as you said, we don't talk about it. How about you, Jenny?
I don't, yeah, it's interesting because the interview was 5 years ago now. Mm-hmm. My life has changed a lot since then. But it is fun to read back and read what Kate did a great job of encapsulating about what I said and feel like, yep, that's it. That's exactly right. In terms of why did I agree to be interviewed, I think it was probably just because we have fabulous conversations. And of course, I want to talk to Kate about any number of things under the sun. And I also feel like I have never been a person to shy away from that I don't have kids. It's never been an awkward subject or that I felt in any way not able to talk about it. But I do also realize I had, at the time of when she asked me, I had recently become a stepmother, although I couldn't at that point in time embrace that label even. And I had, of course, being a librarian, I had, when I need to learn about something, I go and check out a bunch of books. And I checked out all these books on becoming a step-parent, and none of them spoke to me. And so I think there was also a part of feeling like there is not a book like this out there, and that there's something about being able to add to that story, just a different story. I'm one of those cupcakes that always wanted to be a cupcake. And so to be able to tell that story, I think was really important.
And because you walk into spaces that hard conversations happen, I'm going to ask you this one too, is what surprising or hurtful things have people said to you about not having kids?
This goes along with what I was previously saying, is that I never thought that there was anything that was surprising or hurtful that people said, but that was just, I realized after reading the book that I lucked out in just not feeling like I had that burden. And so it wasn't until, well, I read the book and there's, oh, but you'd be such a great mom, or do you have kids, or why not, or oh, just wait till, you'll change your mind. And those never felt hurtful to me. And not until I read the book did I realize, oh, okay, I could see how that would be hurtful and not necessarily appropriate and things. But for me, because it was always a pretty straightforward and easy choice of wanting to be, I'm going to stop saying cupcake, but that's like the new lingo. Not feeling a need to have children, always being pretty clear about that I didn't want to have kids, that it wasn't hurtful, didn't hurt me. But any of the questions that at the end of the book, there's some things that, or even in the book about things that people can say, and all of those things have been asked of me or said to me, but like I said, it just kind of, that's all right.
Yes, I would say that I'm similar to you, Jenny, in that I always wanted to be a cupcake. My mom said I said at 5 I would be a cupcake. So I also have never had a sensitivity to the questions that I think I've been asked. I can answer that I've run into plenty of situations. I lived in Utah for several years, and that's a state that being a non-parent is very unusual. And I remember coming home just irritated one Friday before Mother's Day because I had been in an office and every single person had said to me on the way out the door, "Have a blessed Mother's Day," you know. And also traveling, I've found that you get into interesting conversations because when you're in a country where I travel a lot and I've traveled alone a lot as a female, and being in a country where maybe the traditional family is still very much the cultural expectation, having a conversation in a language which for one of us is not our first language, and trying to explain, oh, do you have children? No, why not? It's always very blatant, why not? And then the concept of, well, they never wanted them. Just complete blank. So not hurtful, but I've certainly run into interesting questions.
I'm going to pipe in, though, that since these conversations that we've been having and reading the book and things, that I've definitely been more sensitive to it. And I was in recently in kind of a tough conversation with two men, and the one of them did turn to me and said, "Do you have kids?" in kind of a lead-in to making a point. And I just sat there and I thought, why didn't you ask him? Why'd you ask me that question and not him that question? And I was also sort of like, it's still a hard question for me to answer because I have stepkids. But I also know that answering that question, do you have kids, is just, well, and I found this for myself as well. I realized that I put people in a box. Oh, you're a mom, you're in this box. Whereas I don't feel like I'm in a box. And then I realized, well, I know a lot of moms and none of them are in boxes in terms of that. And so, but he was definitely, you know, I felt like I was being put in a box even with that question. It was a tough, and yeah, it's a much tougher question for me to answer now than it was 5 years ago. Would you like to entertain that question, Kate?
Actually, I would.
I thought you might.
Thank you, Jenny.
And it's, you know, I feel like this is even just this, the fact that Bobby and I were very clear, probably from a pretty early age, is maybe unique in terms of, or is it, although maybe not, you said half and half, just about.
Well, it's half and half, and if we're not talking about what I've discovered, but I'll just say it anyway, is I think it really is more of a continuum than it is you're in this camp and I'm in this camp, you know, so I'm sitting here between these two others. It's like, no, it's just shades of gray. And then because I interviewed women from their 20s to their 90s, it shifts during the course of the lifetime as how you feel about it. I tried to have kids. I subjected my body to all kinds of procedures, and I didn't even know this still could choke me up. But I know that story is shared by a number of you here. And it's a remarkable thing to know that the technology that women who are infertile go through, it hasn't really changed that much over the course of time. When I finished writing this book, I realized that what the goal of the book is to, again, like I said, help open up the understanding so that the stigmas and stereotypes that have endured, they're the same that they've been since they were first studied in the 70s, would have a chance to shift through exposure and understanding and getting to know people personally. Now that said, so what I ended up doing was, I realized that's the call for action, but I'm leaving people reading this book without tools to have these very difficult conversations. So I added a section where it talks about how do we have the conversation, both when I'm being talked to by a mom or a parent, when a mom or a parent is talking to me, or whether we're talking between and betwixt each other, with just ideas and some guidelines. And in doing that, I found this thing that's called child-free bingo. And it's a whole list of those standard responses that people get, like, oh, you'd be such a good mother. You'll change your mind. You'll never know true love until you look in the eyes of a child that you've born. And all those things may be true, but for the person that is receiving those questions or those comments, it's like, but it's just different for the person that you're talking to. And so the idea of trying to influence things that oftentimes, hey, I get to use the baked analogy, oftentimes are already baked. It's not a very fruitful conversation. And when you've gone through infertility treatments, those kinds of responses just can really hit to the core. And so another thing that I've realized is there are times when you choose and when you have capabilities and you have strength and you have people that are willing to enter into that space with curiosity and openness and without judgment, that's when you go for it. But when you aren't in that place, in the early years when I would get do you have kids? No, I tried, it didn't work, which that was a bad question because that even made it a harder thing. But when getting patted on the arm was a sort of a comfort, but it also conveyed the pity. And I still get the patting on the arm. It's actually in there. A dear person to me did that. And I thought, hey, can I write this up? So I wrote it up. Because it just felt like an appropriate gesture taken in a different time. And so that's just some thoughts about how that comes out. So, what conversations have you guys had with friends and family as a result of being in the book?
You go, Jenny.
Thank you for that. This is my favorite question, actually. Because I've had some amazing, wonderful, great conversations with people, and particularly with my family. So when the book came out, or the proof, I guess we had a proof copy, and I brought it home and handed it to my husband, and he immediately, looked for, as I did, looked for and turned to the chapter or the section that I'm in. And after a few minutes, he set it down, and I said, well, what did you think? And he was just like, yeah, sounds accurate, sounds right. And the piece that is that was in the book is we were newly married, and I was, like I said, newly a stepmom, totally not embracing that role, trying to figure out what do I want to refer to myself as. I mean, I was even thinking about like the adult roommate, like the person that pays the bills, so you need to follow my directions, but not, but I'm not going to like monitor your curfew. And then I actually had my, and by this point we had, when I entered into the relationship, it was two older, by the time we were married, it was a 13 and 15 or 16-year-old probably. And then by the time the book came out, the younger is still at our house. She's with her mom week on, week off. And the older one had gone off to college. So the younger one was at our house, and I said, oh, you should read this. I mean, this is, you need to know what's in here too. So she sat down and read it, and I just kind of sat. And by this point, we have a very different relationship than what was, and it feels much more familial. I do refer to her as my stepdaughter at this point in time. She refers to me as her stepmother, and I don't get nervous about that anymore. And she said, oh, I never thought about it in terms of like your relationship with my mom. And also when kids are, kids think that the adults have it all figured out. And so to read this and realize that you were really nervous and didn't know how to interact with us and that you had a lot of questions too is really, that's news to me. So that I really enjoyed that conversation. And then actually she'd said she wanted to read the whole book, and I thought, ooh, that might be, I wanted her to read the whole book, but I also, that's one of those, I don't think that my role as a stepmom is to encourage my stepdaughters to not have children. That could cause a rift, possibly. So anyway, she took it back. She took it to her mom's house. And then at a later point in time, the older daughter came to our house and said, oh, yeah, my mom showed me your part in the book. And I thought, well, that's probably a really good sign that their mom was, presenting it to them. And so then I read the part again and I thought, oh, wow, this is not a story about me. This is a story about all of us. This is a story about my husband and his daughters and their mom and how we all managed this transition and how we all did it in a really, really good and positive way. And that, thank goodness for that too, because it's in a published book now. And I would have probably been honest no matter what. So that was really fun. And then another conversation that I've had is with my mom. I brought, and again, so far my family has just turned to my part. They haven't read the whole book, but. I had an interesting conversation with my mom and my stepdad about just my choices, why I made my choices, looking back on growing up and what was it that not triggered, but sort of made me make the decision that I wanted to make. And I've had some really great conversations that way. And then also thinking about this idea of listening to people's stories that you don't normally listen to, that you try to have when somebody's telling you about a difficult time, and I definitely have this tendency, is to say, oh, I understand, I know what you're going through, or I've had a similar sort of experience, and to realize that that's not what they want. They want me to be quiet and listen so that they can tell their story, because their story is actually, the times when I'm trying to relate, it's sort of like, no, really, you don't understand. Well, can you just listen to my story? And so having that, Kate and I have talked a lot about that. And so that was it was less of a conversation than a awareness, which is funny because I feel like every time now that I'm telling that story, I'm talking. It's a little awkward. This is my story about how I learned to stop talking. And here I am. Let me tell you more about that.
Stop talking. Before I hand that over to you, I just want to make the observation that in talking to hundreds of women, doing in-depth interviews with them, there were maybe one or two that said they had ever spoken and told their story about how not having kids had impacted their lives, ever. And that this was the longest conversation they ever had. And that's what allowed me really to take in, I am stewarding these women's stories, and this is an honor to do this. So, Bobby, I know you've had some rip-snorting conversations.
That's a good segue. Thanks, Kate. But first I'll tell a funny story. So since talking to Kate over the last probably 3 or 4 years, I've become a bit of a loudmouth about this topic, I would say. I'm just a lot more aware about it and comfortable speaking about it. And so I think 2 weeks ago I was talking at work about what Thursday afternoon, what's everybody doing on their weekend. And I'm an engineer. I work with engineers. There are 2 females in my group, so I was speaking with a bunch of male engineers. And what are you doing this weekend? One's hanging drywall, the other's putting together his glider. He's a glider pilot. He's going to go flying this weekend. What are you doing this weekend? So I launch into the book and all about the research and the health and the end-of-life planning. And then I stop and look at them, and these poor male engineers are like, it scared them. But, so that's been an interesting transition, right? It's a topic I'm a lot more comfortable talking about to people, but the most interesting conversation I know that one Kate would like me to share is that we were writing to book group one night, and Kate was just saying, oh, I've got the spirituality chapter, and it's missing a little something. I need a nun. I looked at her and I said, does she still have to be a nun? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, I have a nun. She's just not a nun anymore. My mom's sister was a Catholic nun who left the sisterhood and has been married now for, I don't know, maybe 20 years or something like that. So I introduced the two of them, which was interesting because, again, I had a conversation with Kate about my experience thinking that I was talking about a research book, and then suddenly I've invited a family member to participate, and my mom's sister, they come from a family of 9 kids. She's the only child in that family at that age, in that generation, who doesn't have children. I'm the only one of my cousins, which are pushing 30 of us, who doesn't have, I'm sorry, I have one male cousin who doesn't have children. And she and I had never had that conversation. So after she had her interview with Kate over the phone, she called me a few weeks later and we talked for an hour, and it was the first time we had talked about it. And I used the analogy, some of you are in the book group, you've heard this, but I used the analogy that after riding back and forth to book group with Kate for an hour each way for several years talking about this, and then talking with my aunt who was speaking about it for the first time, and she's 70 years old, she was still kind of back in the, I called it non-mom 101 conversation. She was still talking very much about what it feels like to be in a group of women where you don't have children, or in her case, grandchildren, and things like that. And that's certainly an important, very important conversation, but Kate's book has taken me way beyond that and into, again, kind of so much more of the research about the health issues that we face, the end-of-life planning, housing issues that we face. And I told Kate, I said, you've taken me to, I'm in non-mom 301 by this station, so.
Graduate program.
Yeah, graduate level. So.
Okay, turnaround's fair play.
Well, actually, I want to, because you mentioned grandkids, and I got permission from my mom in advance to tell this story. So since the book came out, I just asked my mom about, how she felt about the fact that she doesn't have grandkids. And this is, to me, quintessentially my mom, because she is an ultra positive person. And she said, well, it's actually allowed me to do a whole lot of things that I wouldn't have been able to do had I had grandkids. I have a lot of friends who have grandkids, and their lives are kind of taken up by those grandkids. They're asked to, take care of them, and they're interested in taking care of them as well. But because I didn't have that, I've been able to travel and have all these adventures. And that was a really neat way to look at it, and a neat thing for me to hear. And just I think it's when you do sometimes hear that, well, you're missing out. You haven't had this experience because you haven't had kids, or you're missing out because you haven't had grandkids. Well, I've had a lot of other things that other people have missed out on. And she's had a lot of experiences that her friends with grandkids have missed out on. So I think there's many sides to that. And I like being able to look at it in that way.
I promise we'll let you talk, Kate. I
I want to let them talk.
have, Jenny, I just have one more. So my mom and I had a similar conversation. It was a very different reaction. If you read the book, you'll find that I tried to donate eggs to an infertile couple. And when I had to have the conversation with my mom, because I needed family history for that procedure, it took me by complete surprise because, as I said, she knew from the time I was very little that I had no intention of having children. But it was difficult for her to hear that I was willing to give my eggs to someone else. It was an interesting conversation. So again, conversations that I would not have expected. Okay, now you can talk.
Conversations you've had?
No, I was going to actually throw it open to you guys to ask. To ask other questions, yeah, because I do want to leave some time for your questions as well.
Well, I'm curious about this. Why do you think that we don't talk about having kids, and why should we talk about it more?
Oh, I have opinions on that. I think it all goes to the fertile years because we're all the same. And I was reflecting on being a kid and having my aunts, and some of my aunts didn't have kids. And when I think about them now, it's like I didn't have a different relationship or different expectations of them because they didn't have kids. They were just part of the aunthood. And there's the great aunts as well. But I think we don't talk about it because during the fertile years, when we're making the decisions or the decisions are being made for us on all these different levels, it creates, I think, one of the first ways that women become, and men become separated from each other. But I think particularly for women because the experience of giving birth and raising kids is huge. It's super important and super challenging. And so I think that's when it starts to go into the underground. And unless there's some sort of an affirmative action that pulls it out of the underground, and unless there are people who have the courage to go at risk, any of these kinds of conversations, somebody has to take the risk of exposing themselves in different ways, asking more challenging questions. So without all those things happening, then it stays in the underground. And one of the things that I took away from writing this book is particularly the older women, and I'm talking about the 80, 90-year-olds, they love telling their stories because, I mean, it's a time when you're taking stock of life anyway, and to be able to put that overlay on how their lives have unfolded, for me personally, has been hugely helpful. And I realized the other day, I was being interviewed for a podcast by a woman in Montreal, and I made some comment about how it's, I've really shifted and, that's kind of in the past. And she said, it's because you're not grieving anymore. And that's a huge difference. And I realized that through talking to a lot of these women, that really helped me kind of put some things where they needed to be to give me and my life some stability. And now I have this mission and purpose and the whole thing. Because I see the power of just being heard and maybe being understood in a little bit different way.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the concept of having a conversation or talking about an experience that one has not had. This is something that Kate has talked to me about for years, and it took me a really long time to wrap my head around what exactly she meant. How do you have a conversation about something that you didn't do?
Yes. Hugely complex in terms of having the conversation and having something that was quotable in a book and had enough meaty content in a book. So the question really goes to how I ended up designing the conversations that I had. Is I walked into the space with gathering demographic information because, I mean, these are two people that I know and actually have come to know much better and feel much closer to as a result of this whole process. But many of these people I'd never even met before, and they're just a voice on the phone. And so the initial conversation was designed to be 5 or 10 minutes long, and I used to be an employment person, so I can design interview guides for stuff, so there's all kinds of that stuff that's behind there. But so in the initial interview, I talked to them about their family of origin, how many of their siblings had kids or not. You know, it kind of made things a little more chummy, and then we moved into things like how it was that they ended up not having kids. And then I went into some topic areas just to see where their hot buttons were. Because I have the chapters organized by the life cycle. So it starts with the impacts on the world of work and goes through friendships and family, carrying all the way through to end-of-life planning and what we leave behind when we die. And so then they chose what area they wanted to talk about. And then that's when I made that comment about, we're talking about the impact of something that we didn't do. So think about this for a while, let it sit, and the things that will come up, that's what we'll talk about in a week or two. And then I had a much longer conversation, usually about an hour long, to talk to about what those impacts were in one or two topic areas. And you see sometimes the women reappear later in the book. So.
I was thinking about this on the way down, on the drive down today, this very question, and I thought, you know, if I put myself in a parallel universe and I said to you, ma'am, do you have a pet penguin? Do you? I'm gonna say, no, probably not. How do you think your life is different because you never had a pet penguin? That's what it felt like to get Kate's questions the first time.
Wow.
And I mean, everybody can relate to that, you know, but after reading Kate's book, now the conversation would be much more about, hey, did you hear that, did you see that study about penguin owners? They have way better circulation because they have to jump in and out of frigid cold water to walk their penguins. You know, but then now you've got something to talk about, whereas the first time you get hit with those questions, again, it's talking about something that you have no idea what you're not talking about.
And knowing her, that is a fact that they have better circulation, right? Because you wouldn't just say that. I've never heard that before. That is beautiful.
I looked it up, penguin owners.
Well, we want to leave time for your questions as well. So Jenny's going to walk around with a mic if you want to use a mic otherwise. But please, questions you have on the topic, on the process, for any of us.
So you said you interviewed about 100 women, and I wondered how you selected them.
Thank you for
Did
the
everybody
question.
hear that, or do we need to, should we repeat the question?
Yeah.
It's good? Repeat.
You should repeat.
Yeah, repeat the question.
People don't do to the mic.
I should have been listening then. No. That you interviewed about 100 people.
And how did it go?
How did you go about that? Yeah.
It used the snowball technique of research gathering subjects, which just means one person talked to another person, talked to another person. I also became really shameless about asking people on planes and people I met standing in line, and I ended up talking to complete strangers that way, and people would talk to me. So that's how it happened, and I haven't done the actual tally of how many people altogether. I think the longer interviews, I probably did close to 100 of them, and I made myself transcribe the notes because I wanted to make sure that I was hearing what I thought I had heard. It was wonderful to do that because I realized that I was talking too much because I was nervous about going into these personal spaces, because an employment interviewer, you just know we could go to those places. And I realized that to Jenny's point earlier, if I was just quiet, that they would offer more and more insightful information as well. So that was a really good learning. But no, it's not a statistically validated study. It's not an academic project. Though what I do hope is that falling from it, if you know any people who are in graduate programs that would have any interest in this, I've got a list a mile long of all the research that needs to be done, because that was the hard thing. I would sit in a chair day after day after day after day, going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, looking for something, because we've not been well studied. It's starting to shift a little bit, but.
What about women from other cultures, other races, other religions? How much, I mean, you're talking about this kind of being a snowball effect. Did you actually try to go out and get some statistics from other cultures?
I did use a number of international studies, again, because there's such a dearth of material. I also narrowed my scope to North America, because I gotta get this thing. And I also just talked to women, though, as a result of doing this, and some of the amazing conversations that I've had with men. If I'm gonna write another book, I think that might be it, because I thought a man should write that book, but what I know now is that we women are often the gatekeepers to this kind of material, and I am blown away at how much men's stories are just exactly at the surface the same as ours are.
Well, my question is sort of on the same line as hers. I was wondering how many women of different nationalities, because I'm Hispanic. I don't see any other Hispanics in here, but there is a lot of pressure. So I grew up with all that pressure.
Yes. I have some statistical material about races and and cultures and ethnicities. In terms of how my population broke down and the women who are profiled in the book, I know there are some African American women. I did not gather ethnicity, so I don't know, to be honest, the ethnicity of the people in the book. And that might be I suspect that it is another reason why it's not statistically accurate. Yes.
So Kate and I also tried, we tried to do a book discussion group at the library and got a few people interested, and we were definitely feeling like we want to get some Hispanic women there to talk about their experiences. And we actually went to get some funding, and I talked to two, because this was purely because the group that I thought would give us funding, the two connections that I had were two Hispanic men. And I presented the idea to them, and they said, oh, I don't think you'll get any women that want to talk about that. Or there's just that doesn't really exist. I mean, it was kinder than that, but it was sort of, this, I'm sure that...
It's because they're too macho.
Well,
but the women have changed.
yeah.
I mean, myself, you don't know how much I've changed. You know what I mean?
And these were not ultra macho
No, but I think
men,
it's just
but-
something that they don't talk about in the community.
Right.
You're a failure, or I don't know what.
So we did attempt to do this, and we had a very, I knew one Hispanic woman that I reached out to, and then she also had a friend, and we were so excited about the possibility for this conversation to happen, but a couple different meetings occurred and they were not able to make it, so unfortunately, that conversation didn't happen. But I just thought that was really... Oh, and then I did talk to those men later, and they had kind of come around to like, oh, it was sort of like it took a little while to trickle down, and then they realized, oh yeah, okay, I could see that actually happening and working and whatnot. The funding part wasn't going to happen anyway. The attempt was there to have that conversation, and just unfortunately didn't quite snowball.
I think it has a chance to get some legs in the future, for sure. And it's like...
You had that conversation at the food truck, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's opening doors. That's my job, is just opening doors. We probably have time for one more question.
Do you find that it's a generational thing? Is it trickle-down generational that more and more women are choosing not to have children?
Yes and no. After this is where my statistics kind of get stuck for me, but the silent generation, I think they were 10% didn't have kids, and some of that was as a result of being war times and so forth. It went up into the 20% probably within the last 10 years. We don't know the impact yet of the recession on the birth rate. So I think there's so many variables that come to play. And the other thing is each country does its counts completely differently. And so comparing apples to apples is virtually impossible. And then within a country, they'll shift how they gather the data. So yeah, I don't think that it's something that is easily predictable. But it will always be with us that this is a part of our culture and our population that is little explored.
I would say that I have, whether the statistics will change, I think that the conversation and I guess this is just obviously anecdotally, but that the question about to have or not to have is a more acceptable question and conversation for younger women. I have found that I'm running into a number of 30-somethings who I mention about the book, and there's a lot of interest there because these women are asking themselves that question about whether or not that's the direction they want to go. And so this is too kind of this, there previously really hasn't even been well, if I choose not to, what is that going to be like? And now we get to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I can add to that saying that I was back in Dayton, Ohio, and would have small group discussions after I did some stuff with the faculty. And in 2 separate small group discussions, women in their 30s came specifically to ask the exact same question. I don't know if they were friends or not, but they said, I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna have kids, and we didn't go into why. But they said, but I'm having a really hard time picturing what my life might look like and what I'm gonna do with the next 60 years of my life. So I wanted to go. And I'm going to I'm gonna find them because I'm going to Dayton next week and see if I can get them, find them. So do you want to hear a little bit more out of the book and then we can? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna read just the tail end of the introduction too. So it kind of circles around how this whole thing works. I know many parents and grandparents are interested in what their children's and grandchildren's lives without their own kids are like, but they're reluctant to approach the topic for fear of hurting feelings. In Do You Have Kids? Life When the Answer is No, those of us who have been without children for years share our stories in hopes of building broader understanding and encouraging conversation. What's nowhere in these pages is criticisms of mothers for having children, nor are there value judgments of any woman for her reproductive choices or circumstance. Not because these comments were edited out, but because no woman I spoke with expressed any such sentiment. Life without kids can be as interesting and rewarding as raising a family. Our impact on the world is enormous, but often understated. At work, we earn money and wield power. In relationships with friends, family, and other people's kids, our interests and contributions change lives. While our reproductive systems may be subject to malady, we bring a diverse presence to the communities in which we live. And after our time on earth is done, we leave behind something other than the footsteps of our children. Mothers regularly help expectant women navigate pregnancy, and after their babies are born, they guide new mothers into their unfamiliar new role. It's a beautiful intergenerational connection. But your mom can't describe what it's like not having kids, and there's no what to expect when you're expecting, when you're not and never will be. In Do You Have Kids? Women Without Children are candid, often funny, and always insightful about what our lives are like, the good, the bad, the unexpected. Thank you so much. This is just perfect being here for this book launch. And so, Scylla, did you want to describe what will happen next, or do you want me to go ahead? I may? Lovely. Well, we'll be here for a little while. Scylla has books for sale. I'll be sitting with Bobby at the signing table while Jenny goes to her house, where there will be a reception after our meeting. And I have to say that my book group, who is sponsoring this, is a lot of winemakers, so there's going to be a fair amount of wine there. And you're all invited to come. There's little slips with Jenny's address at the signing table. And I'll be available for questions. I should say, if you know people who would perhaps like to hear a similar kind of a talk, this is my big coup. May 31st, I'm going to be at Powell's, and we'll do something. And we'll do something very similar with other women who are in the book, because one of my goals is to continue the conversation with the community of women. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh.